The dust was still falling when I heard her scratching at the rubble from the inside. I had my arm in the gap to the elbow before anyone could stop me, and when my fingers found a hand that was not a hand, too many joints, skin cool as creek water, half the men behind me stepped back instead of digging. That was Galt's reach for you. A roof had come down on sublevel 4, and the thing under the rock had 4 fingers and faint light running under its skin like wire, and that was enough. They called for the foreman instead of a crowbar. I called for the crowbar myself. She came out small and gray and folded wrong from being folded too long, and the light under her skin pulsed once, bright, when the air hit her, and 3 grown miners crossed themselves and one of them said the word cursed before I had her clear of the stone. I didn't argue with him. I carried her past him instead, down to my clinic, and that was the argument. I'd been Galt's Reach's only doctor for 11 years by then, patched up every man who'd ever called this child a curse, knew which of them owed me a knee or a lung or a wife who'd lived. I traded on that debt without shame. Nobody came to take her back out of my clinic that first night, though 3 of them stood in my doorway working up the nerve to ask. Her people are called Thren, I learned later, from a trader who didn't flinch at her. The light under the skin is a marrow thing, a luminescent compound that runs through their blood the way iron runs through ours, not a curse, not a soul leaking out, just biology, the same as a man's pulse showing blue at the wrist. I told the tunnel that. Half of them believed me. The other half kept their distance and crossed themselves anyway, and I let them, because fear is slower to die than rock dust and I had a child to feed. She didn't speak the first 4 nights. She watched my hands instead, watched everything I did to her with a kind of weary, careful patience, the look of something that has learned, hard, what hands can do. I set her splinted wrist and she didn't make a sound. I learned faster than she trusted, which is the wrong order, but it's the order we had. By the 5th night she was gripping 2 fingers of mine in her sleep, hard enough to leave a mark, and I'd stopped minding what that meant. On the 8th day a man named Corin, who worked the ore scales and owed me nothing, tried to file a report on the relay to a trading post 2 transits down, unregistered alien juvenile, possible bounty, location confirmed. I caught him at the relay station with the message half sent. I didn't shout at him. I asked him, plainly, whether he wanted me at his bedside the next time the scale crew brought him down with crushed ribs, because I would remember this. He cancelled the message himself, hands shaking, and didn't meet my eyes again for a week. I told no one else. It cost him enough already, and it bought me a warning I hadn't had before. Word had already crossed 2 transits before I'd even named her. The crew came up from the lower transit 11 days later. 4 of them, clean boots, no rust on their guns, which told me more than their manners did. Their lead man introduced himself as Reyes Tull and called himself a broker, which was the polite word for it. He said there'd been reports of an unregistered Thren juvenile recovered in a collapse on this level. He said the marrow compound in a Thren child fetches a clean price from 3 different buyers he could name, and that the child would feel none of the harvesting, and that he'd pay the colony a finder's fee on top, generous, no trouble for anyone. He smiled when he said no trouble. I'd treated enough men with that exact smile cut open on my table to know what it meant when it stayed on a man's face that long. I told him there was no unregistered Thren juvenile in my clinic. I told him there was a patient under my care, and patient records were mine to keep closed, and that the foreman could confirm I'd buried that right into colony law myself, 11 years back, the week I arrived. The week half of them were still calling me an unregistered risk too. Tull's smile didn't move. He said he'd be back in the morning with paperwork that outranked colony law, and that I should consider, in the meantime, whether one doctor's stubbornness was worth what 4 armed men were prepared to do about it. I considered it. It took me about 4 seconds. I spent the night calling in 11 years of debt instead of sleeping. I went to the man whose lung I'd reinflated with my own hands in a tunnel fire, and the woman whose breech birth I'd turned at 3 in the morning with nothing but soap and nerve, and the foreman who'd have lost his leg to gangrene if I hadn't argued him into the amputation he didn't want, and I told every one of them the same thing: there is a child in my clinic and 4 men are coming for her at first light, and I am calling in what you owe me, all of it, tonight." Not one of them asked me twice. By the time Tull's crew came up the transit shaft at first light, the corridor outside my clinic held 41 miners standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark, lamps off, saying nothing. The foreman at the front with the colony's actual charter in his hand and a face like the rock itself. Tull had his paperwork. He held it up like it would do the work the 4 guns weren't going to be allowed to do in a corridor that narrow, against that many bodies who'd decided, overnight, that the curse they'd been afraid of for 11 days was worth less to them than the doctor who'd kept every one of them breathing. I don't know exactly what was said in that corridor. I was behind the foreman with the child's hand wrapped in mine, and what I remember clearest isn't the argument, it's that her grip never once tightened past where it already was. She wasn't afraid. She'd learned, in 11 days, what this colony's hands could do, and she'd sorted us already into the ones worth gripping and the ones who didn't matter. There was a moment, maybe 10 seconds long, when one of Tull's men reached for the doorframe to push past the foreman, and 41 bodies shifted forward as one without a sound, no shouting, no weapons raised, just the simple physical fact of that many people deciding not to move. The man's hand came back down. Tull read that better than his paperwork could argue with, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. 4 guns against 41 men who had nothing left to lose by using their hands, in a corridor too narrow to bring a weapon to bear on more than one of them at a time. Tull's crew left on the next transit down. Nobody laid a hand on them past the door. The foreman walked them to the lift himself, which was its own kind of message, and they took it. What I remember of the morning after is small things. Steam off the recycler vents catching grey light at the mouth of the shaft. The miner whose lung I'd saved bringing me a tin of real coffee he'd been hoarding 2 years, setting it on my table without a word, the closest that man would ever come to saying thank you out loud. And the child, sitting on my exam table in the new daylight pouring down through the shaft grate, watching me with that same weary patience, waiting, I understood, finally, for me to do the thing every guardian of her kind does once a child is safe. To give her a name of her own, not a designation, not the word the tunnel had hung on her. I asked her what sound felt like hers. She made one, low, almost a hum, that I never could repeat exactly right, so I gave her the closest sound my mouth could hold to it and called her Pell, and something in her shoulders came down an inch that had not come down since the rock first opened over her head. 11 years I'd kept this colony's bodies in one piece and never once thought of it as keeping. That morning, watching a child answer to a name I'd given her, I understood the difference for the first time, and I have not mistaken the two since.